They say you should never get too comfortable at your job, but when you've spent 16 years running a production line without a single safety violation, without a missed deadline, without even a single product recall, comfort isn't the word. It's commitment. I'm Amanda Reyes. I'm 47 years old, and for most of my adult life, I was the senior floor coordinator at McLen Manufacturing, one of the largest consumer packaging plants in the Midwest. I started there when my daughter was in kindergarten. By the time she graduated college, I was the one keeping the machines humming, the workflow steady, the numbers green. My team called me the anchor. My supervisors called me reliable. And for years, that was enough. Until one Monday morning, I was called into a conference room with beige walls and a forced smile from HR. "We're restructuring," they said, like it was a weather report. Not performance-related, just a strategic shift. I remember how the word strategic landed like a punch in the ribs. I wasn't fired. No, that would have made too much noise. Instead, they said they were phasing me out. My position was being streamlined into a new role, one that would be filled by someone younger, cheaper, more digitally native, right? Whatever that means. "And we'd love for you to help with the transition," said Lauren from HR, her voice soft, like she thought I might cry. I didn't cry. I nodded. Because after 16 years, you learn not to react until you're alone. The new hire was a 25-year-old named Devin. Fresh MBA, zero factory experience. He wore loafers on his first day, the kind that don't survive a warehouse floor. He introduced himself as a process optimization guy and smiled like this was his sandbox now. They asked me to train him. 1 week. That's what they gave me. I spent that week showing him the layout, the pressure points, the quirks of each conveyor belt. I handed over my manuals, my spreadsheets, the annotated logs I'd maintained over a decade and a half. I even walked him through the emergency shutoff protocol, the one I wrote myself after a near miss back in 2010. He didn't take notes. The night before my last day, I stayed late, alone. I walked the floor listening to the quiet tick of the machines, the hum of the automated packaging arm. Every corner of that space held a memory. Training new hires, fixing systems during storms, working through holidays so others could be home with their families. I didn't take a selfie. I didn't post about it. I just stood there and let the moment imprint on me. Then I turned in my badge. Nobody threw a party. No goodbye card. Just an auto-generated email. "Thank you for your service. We wish you success in your next chapter." I wasn't angry. Not yet. At first, it felt like grief. Like I had lost a part of my identity I didn't even know I still clung to. My daughter, Maya, came home from grad school that weekend. I tried to pretend everything was fine. "You okay, Mom?" she asked over dinner. "Yeah," I said, pushing vegetables around my plate. "Just adjusting." She looked at me the way daughters do when they know their mothers are lying but choose not to press. Instead, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You built that place," she said. "Don't let them make you feel disposable." I smiled, but inside I felt hollow. Over the next few months, I did what I've always done. I observed. From a distance. I still had friends on the floor. People who texted me, called me on bad days, told me things they weren't supposed to. And slowly, the cracks began to show. Missed quotas, safety violations. A small injury swept under the rug, then 2 more. Customers started complaining about late deliveries. The maintenance backlog tripled. One of the machines, a pressure sealer I'd spent years tuning, failed during a double shift, damaging thousands of units. I stayed quiet. Until the day Maya sent me a screenshot. It was a Reddit thread from a whistleblower account. "Working at McLen is a disaster. Ever since they pushed out the experienced staff, it's been nonstop chaos. I don't feel safe." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. And for the first time since I left, I didn't feel sad. I felt something else. Something sharp. This wasn't about cost cutting anymore. This was about the cost of forgetting who built the system in the first place. And I was done watching from a distance. The first time someone reached out, it was subtle. A message from Becca, one of the shift leads I'd trained back in 2015. She never called me unless it was important. "Hey, Amanda, can we talk? Something's going on." We met at a quiet diner off Route 9. She looked tired, paler than usual. Her hands shook slightly as she stirred her coffee. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said quickly, but I didn't know who else to call. "You're never a bother," I replied. "Tell me what's happening." She took a breath and launched into it. Missed safety checks, workers quitting mid-shift, Devin making decisions without consulting anyone on the floor. She described a conveyor jam that wasn't reported for 2 full hours because the night lead didn't want to wake the new boss. Thousands of units had to be discarded. "I tried to raise it to Lauren in HR," she said, voice low. But she just said, "We're in a period of transition. Be flexible." I felt a tightness crawl up my spine. "Has anyone else said anything?" She nodded. "Yeah," quietly. "But no one wants to risk being seen as a problem. You know how it is." I did. For 16 years, I watched how the company handled problems. First, they ignore you. Then they isolate you. Then they replace you. Becca looked at me, her voice barely a whisper now. "Amanda, I think someone's going to get seriously hurt." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the couch with the lamp on low, flipping through old notebooks from my time at McLean. Process maps, contingency plans, even old floor rosters. My notes were always detailed. Obsessively so, some would say. But now they felt like breadcrumbs. Proof that the system had once worked. That it could again. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't an employee anymore. I had no title, no power. Just a box of records and a rising sense of responsibility. Then I remembered the whistleblower thread, the Reddit post. It hadn't been from Becca. Someone else had spoken up, which meant there were others, people who still cared. I created an anonymous email address and posted a response. If you've worked at McLean and noticed changes that put people at risk, you're not alone. There are people who will listen and help. Within 2 days, I had 9 emails, all from current or recently departed employees, most of them afraid, all of them angry. Stories of cuts to training hours, safety drills skipped, a forklift incident in Warehouse B that was never filed. But one email stopped me cold. "I was injured 2 weeks ago. Devin told me not to report it. Said it would look bad during audits. I had to use vacation time to heal." No name, no signature, just pain. That was the moment I knew silence wasn't an option anymore. I called Maya. She was in Boston finishing her graduate program, but she picked up on the first ring. "Hey, Mom, everything okay?" "I need your help," I said. "Legal help." A pause. Then, "Tell me everything." By the end of the week, we had a plan. Maya connected me to a former professor who specialized in corporate whistleblower protections. We spent hours going through every note, every email, every piece of information I'd received. Everything had to be airtight, clean, documented. "You don't just want a story," the professor said. "You want change. That means being precise." And precise was something I knew how to be. Meanwhile, more messages trickled in. One from Raphael, a longtime technician who said he'd nearly quit after his suggestion to fix the ventilation system was dismissed as unnecessary expense. Another from Janice, who said morale was so low she'd caught one of her junior staff crying in the break room after being chewed out for asking too many questions. It was unraveling, quietly but steadily. I didn't tell them I was behind the email account. I didn't need recognition. I needed truth. But the moment that sealed it came late one night. I got a message from an unknown number. Just a photo. A production line, mid-shift. Boxes stacked haphazardly. A spilled container on the floor. And in the background, a worker using duct tape to repair part of the sorting mechanism. I zoomed in and felt my stomach turn. That was the same sorting unit I'd warned them about during my last month. I'd logged the maintenance issue. Twice. It had been flagged for replacement. They hadn't replaced it. They'd patched it. With tape. That's when the anger came. Not like a spark, but like a slow-building fire. Because it was no longer about me being replaced. It was about the system being broken. And I wasn't going to watch it crumble from the sidelines anymore. Not when people could get hurt. Not when the people I trained were left cleaning up the mess of someone else's strategic shift. You'd think after 16 years of loyalty, walking away would be the hardest part. But no. The hardest part was realizing just how quickly they had buried everything I'd built. The following week, I received a call from Jerome, one of the plant's machine operators. His voice was tight with frustration. "They're blaming us now," he said. "Management says the output issues are our fault, that we're not adapting fast enough to the new protocols." "Protocols?" I asked. "Yeah, Devin rolled out a new schedule system. Reduced downtime, fewer rotation breaks. He says it's lean manufacturing, but it's chaos. We're exhausted. Mistakes are up. Everyone's on edge." I knew what that meant. Cutting rotation breaks might look efficient on paper, but in reality, it pushed people past their limit. And in production work, fatigue was dangerous. Slower reactions, less focus, higher risk of injury. "What about safety audits?" I asked. Jerome laughed bitterly. "They pushed the audit to next quarter, said they needed time to prepare. It was classic damage control. Buy time, shift blame, hope no one notices." But I noticed. And I wasn't the only one. That weekend, I invited Becca, Raphael, and Janice to my house. No formal meeting, just coffee, sandwiches, and a whiteboard in my living room. It felt strange seeing them outside of the warehouse context. These were people I'd led for years. Now we sat as equals, strategizing like survivors. "I've documented everything I've received," I said, pointing to a binder I'd compiled. "We have enough here to show a pattern. Mismanagement, neglect, and retaliatory culture." Janice looked uneasy. "But what happens if we go public? They'll retaliate." "They already are," Becca said softly, just not loudly. Raphael leaned forward. "What do we want, Amanda? An apology? Or do we want accountability?" I met his gaze. "I want change. I want the people responsible to be seen. And I want the board to know what's happening under their nose." That's when the idea hit me. The board. They were always distant. High-rise executives who saw the plant through spreadsheets and quarterly reports. But if they were made aware of what was really going on, documented and credible, they couldn't claim ignorance. So I made a decision. I wrote a letter. Not an emotional rant. A case file. Detailed, professional, supported by photos, testimonials, and internal data that had made its way to me. I outlined the decline since the leadership shift, the impact of the decisions, the risk it created, not just to people, but to their bottom line. I ended it with one line. "The plant may be your asset, but it's our livelihood. You can't fix what you refuse to see." I signed my name. No hiding, no anonymous email. I mailed it to every board member listed on McLenn's public financial disclosures. Maya helped me draft a second version, one that would go to a regional labor watchdog if the board didn't respond within 2 weeks. Not a threat, just a contingency. Then we waited. 10 days passed. Nothing. On the 11th day, I received an envelope by certified mail. McLean Corporate Affairs. Inside was a brief, formal note from the board's compliance chair. "Ms. Reyes, thank you for your recent correspondence. We take these matters seriously and are reviewing the documentation you submitted. We will initiate a formal inquiry and will be in contact shortly. It wasn't an admission, but it was acknowledgement. And that was more than I expected." The next day, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Amanda Reyes?" the voice asked. "Yes." "This is Daniel Pratt. I'm the senior advisor to the board's risk committee. I'd like to meet. Off record, confidential. Just you and me." We met in a neutral location, a small hotel conference room near the airport. He was younger than I expected, sharp-eyed, carrying a tablet and a legal pad. He didn't waste time. The board had no idea the transition was going this badly, he said. They were sold a narrative of innovation and cost efficiency. Your letter painted a very different picture. Because it is a very different picture, I replied. He nodded. You understand, if we investigate formally, it won't stay quiet. I'm not asking for quiet, I said calmly. I'm asking for truth. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Devon's position was championed by the current COO. If this unfolds the way I think it might, you're going to make powerful people very nervous. I'm not here to make friends, I said. I'm here to make sure no one else bleeds for someone else's spreadsheet. He didn't argue. He just closed his notepad and said, You'll be hearing from us soon. As I drove home, something shifted in me. For months, I'd been collecting other people's testimonies, other people's truths. But now the system was finally looking back, and I wasn't afraid of what it might see. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. 3 days after my meeting with Daniel Pratt, I got a call from Janice. Her voice was tight. Someone's asking questions about who leaked the information. I closed my eyes. Are you okay? I haven't said a word, Amanda, she replied. But it's getting weird. Devon suddenly pulled me off scheduling duties, said it's just temporary. She paused, then added, and Becca got reassigned to night shift, without warning. It had begun. The pushback. The subtle retaliation companies use when they want to punish someone, but don't want to get caught doing it. The next day, Raphael called me in a fury. They wrote me up for a mistake I didn't make. A mislabel on inventory. That section wasn't even mine. My stomach turned. This was what fear looked like from the top down. And I knew how it worked. Not with pink slips or dramatic terminations, just enough pressure to make people doubt themselves. Isolate them. Shame them into silence. But this time I was ready. That evening, I opened the folder Maya and I had labeled Contingency Phase 2. Inside was a strategy we'd hoped we wouldn't need. Escalation protocols. Media contacts. A pre-drafted letter to the Department of Labor. And testimonies, sworn and notarized, from Becca, Raphael, Janice, and 2 others who hadn't come forward publicly yet, but were willing to step up if it came to that. I reached out to Daniel. They're retaliating, I said. Silently. Strategically. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I believe you, he said. But we need something actionable. A name. A pattern. Hard documentation. I'll get it, I told him. But when I do, I want this addressed publicly. You have my word. That night, I stayed up past midnight, combing through emails forwarded to me. One from a supervisor who questioned Devon's overtime cuts and was then removed from the shift schedule for 2 weeks. Another from a young temp who had resigned after being scolded for slowing down the line during a heat wave. No fans, no AC, just sweat and pressure and fear. And then I got the file that broke me. It came from an anonymous address. No message, just a scan of an incident report. A 19-year-old worker had been hospitalized after collapsing on the production floor. Heat exhaustion. No ambulance was called. He was driven to urgent care by a coworker. The report was marked internal only and buried in a closed log. My hands shook as I read the timestamp. 3 weeks ago. They had buried it. I forwarded the file to Daniel and then to Maya. Her reply came instantly. We have enough. We move now. That morning, we submitted the formal complaint to the Department of Labor, along with over 30 supporting documents and witness statements. And then I did something I hadn't planned. I called a journalist. Her name was Alina Foster, an investigative reporter I'd followed for years. She specialized in corporate accountability, quiet revolutions. When I told her the story, she didn't hesitate. On the record? She asked. Yes, I said, voice steady. Use my name. Use everything. I gave her access to the files, the testimonies, the photos. I even sent her the letter I wrote to the board. She asked sharp questions, took detailed notes, and then said the words I hadn't realized I needed to hear. "You're not overreacting. You're doing what most people are too scared to do." The story was scheduled to run the following week, but even before it hit, something started to shift. Daniel called me again. This time his tone was different. "Internal legal is now involved," he said. "The COO is under review. There's talk of pausing Devon's role pending the inquiry." I didn't celebrate, because I knew retaliation has a long tail. The next day, my name was leaked. Someone inside McLean, maybe HR, maybe Devon, told the staff who had filed the complaint, told them who had gone public. I found out from Janice, whose voice trembled with worry. "They're calling you a traitor, saying you just want revenge." I didn't blame them. It's what management wanted them to believe. Because if they could turn me into the villain, they wouldn't have to face what they'd done. That night, Maya called. "Are you okay?" I hesitated. "I don't know." I stood at the window, looking out over the quiet street. Somewhere in the city, Devon was probably spinning a new story. One where I was bitter, unqualified, difficult. But stories only work when people don't fight back. I thought of Becca on night shift, of Raphael and his fake write-up, of the young man who passed out while trying to earn a paycheck. And then I answered her. "I'm scared," I said honestly, "but I'm also done being quiet." The article went live on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee, trying to pretend the day would be normal. But when my phone buzzed and I saw Alina Foster's name, I knew it was time. The headline read, "Inside McLean Manufacturing, a culture of retaliation, neglect, and silence." My name was in the subheading. So was the phrase, 16 years without a single safety violation. I read it slowly, every word. Alina hadn't sensationalized it. She didn't have to. The truth was damning enough. She had quotes from former employees, anonymized where needed. She had the timeline, the testimonies, the scanned incident report about the 19-year-old worker. She even included parts of my letter to the board. But it was the final line that hit the hardest. Amanda Reyes didn't speak out to burn bridges. She spoke out to protect the people still walking across them. The article spread faster than I could process. LinkedIn, Twitter, industry forums, even a Reddit AMA tagged me as the Macklin whistleblower. By noon, I had over 100 unread emails. Some were supportive. Old coworkers thanking me. A few from total strangers saying they'd gone through the same thing in different industries. Quiet gratitude from people who had no voice where they worked. But not all the messages were kind. One email read, "You think you're helping? All you did was put good people's jobs at risk. You should be ashamed." Another simply said, "You'll never work in this industry again." I stared at that one longer than I'd like to admit, because a part of me feared it was true. That night, I kept the lights low. Maya offered to stay on the phone, but I told her I was okay. I wasn't. I was unraveling slowly, wondering if I'd miscalculated, if speaking up had done more harm than good. But then the first domino fell. The board of Macklin Manufacturing released a statement. Effective immediately, Chief Operating Officer Benjamin Calloway has been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of an internal investigation. Devon's name wasn't mentioned, but insiders knew what it meant. Calloway was Devon's mentor. His rise had been fast, reckless, and now clearly unsustainable. I thought about the smug way Devon had shaken my hand on his first day. The way he smiled like he already owned the place. The way he wore loafers on a concrete floor. No apologies. No acknowledgement. But silence spoke loudly. More messages came. "Amanda, we owe you. That article hit harder than we thought. We're with you if you take this further." Janice. My cousin works at the warehouse. Said the entire shift paused when the news broke. They cheered. Anonymous. "I've been working in silence for years. You reminded me that we deserve better. Former plant manager from another state. For every threat, there were 10 voices rising to meet it. But McLean didn't stay silent for long. 2 days after the article, they launched a PR campaign, a blog post titled, "Building a Safer Tomorrow." Buzzwords filled every sentence. New leadership, renewed focus, employee-first culture, no accountability, no apology. Then Devin reappeared, this time on a podcast hosted by a corporate innovation channel. His voice was steady, rehearsed. I think what we're seeing is the resistance that always comes with progress. Change is uncomfortable, but manufacturing needs modernization. Some people just don't like letting go. Some people? He never said my name, but I felt every syllable like a blade. I paused the podcast and sat with the silence. The arrogance, the total lack of ownership. It was the same story, told in different clothes. The same system that replaces experience with buzzwords, then blames the fallout on the ones who built the foundation. That night, I walked to the old plant entrance, just to see it. The lights were still on, forklifts humming, workers moving like ghosts under fluorescent buzz. 6 months ago, I ran that line. 6 months ago, I kept that place alive. And now they had the nerve to erase it all with a podcast and a PR spin. Number I hadn't come this far to let them write the final chapter. The next morning, I met Daniel again, this time at a downtown office. He looked tired but focused. "We've begun interviewing staff," he said. "The complaints line has been overwhelmed, and frankly, it's worse than we thought." I handed him a folder. Inside were new statements. People who hadn't felt safe until now. A former floor manager, a machine technician, even a junior HR rep who confirmed Callaway's pressure to streamline by targeting veteran staff. "You asked for actionable documentation," I said. "Now you've got it." Daniel nodded. "You've lit a fire, Amanda. And this time, it's not burning in the shadows." As I left the building, I saw the city skyline rising through the glass. I wasn't just fighting for my old job anymore. I was fighting for every worker who had been told they were too expensive, too slow, too outdated. And I wasn't done yet. The notice came on a quiet Thursday morning. An official email marked confidential for immediate distribution. The subject line, "Leadership Transition at Macklin Manufacturing." Inside was a simple announcement. After a comprehensive investigation into internal operations, Macklin Manufacturing has accepted the resignation of COO Benjamin Callaway. Effective immediately, an interim leadership team will oversee operations while we evaluate long-term cultural reforms. No fanfare, no excuses, just an ending. I read the message 3 times, then set my phone down on the kitchen counter. The air felt still, like the moment after a storm when the wind finally dies down. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't crying. I was just still. Maya called 2 minutes later. "You saw it?" "I did. And?" "I don't know," I said quietly. I thought it would feel like a win. "Doesn't it?" I paused. "It feels like a start." Because the truth is, justice never comes with a parade. It comes in waves. Quiet, slow, sometimes messy. And even when it arrives, it doesn't erase the damage. It just acknowledges that it happened. Later that day, I received a call from Daniel Pratt. "Thought you should hear it from me," he said. "The board is initiating a full review of plant policies, mandatory retraining, third-party oversight, and they're dissolving the performance review system Callaway implemented." I nodded, listening. "And Devin?" I asked. "Terminated last week." Quietly. But the board agreed to issue a public acknowledgement of the production failures under his leadership. It'll be part of next quarter's investor report. He paused, then added, "I hope that helps." "It does," I said. "But I didn't do this for the footnotes." Daniel hesitated, then said something that stayed with me. "You're one of the only people I've met who didn't speak up for recognition. You spoke up because you couldn't sleep knowing you hadn't." That night, I finally allowed myself to breathe. It had been months of tension, of pushback and whispers, of fear and doubt. But now, there was space. And in that space, something unexpected took root. Not revenge, not pride, but clarity. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Raphael. "We just had our first all-hands meeting with the new interim director," he said. "And Amanda, you won't believe this. They asked us what we needed, what had been broken. They actually listened." Becca texted later. "They're reinstating rotation breaks, and we're getting hazard pay retroactively. Can you believe it?" I could. Because when people finally see you, not just as a name on a badge, but as the spine of the system, things begin to shift. In small ways, but real ones. That weekend, Maya flew home. We sat on the back porch with coffee and warm blankets, watching the morning fog lift off the trees. She looked over at me. "So, what's next?" I smiled. "Honestly, I don't know, but I'm not going back." "You could," she said. "They'd take you back in a heartbeat." "I could," I agreed. "But I spent 16 years proving my worth to people who only saw me as a cost. I'm done chasing validation." She nodded, thoughtful. "What if you started something new? A training consultancy? You've got more knowledge in your notebooks than half the leadership teams in the state." I laughed. "You're serious. Dead serious. You built a system from the ground up. You trained generations. Companies need that. But this time you set the terms." I let the thought settle. It didn't feel scary. It felt possible. And then 2 weeks later, I got the message that sealed it. It was from a regional plant manager at a competitor company. "Amanda, we read the article. We followed what happened. I just wanted to say thank you. You gave people like me permission to question what we'd accepted for too long. If you ever decide to consult, we'd love to talk." Maya was right. I didn't need McLenn's approval. I had something stronger now. A reputation rooted in truth, and a voice that no longer whispered. By spring, I launched my own business, Reyes Operations Consulting. Not flashy, not loud, but real. We trained leadership teams on frontline communication, ethical staffing, and safety-forward production design. Within 3 months, we had 4 contracts. One of them, McLenn's former supplier. But the moment that mattered most didn't come from an inbox or a headline. It came one afternoon at the grocery store. A young woman in a warehouse hoodie approached me nervously. "Are you Amanda Reyes?" "I am. I work second shift at McLenn. I just wanted to say thank you. Things feel different now, safer. We can breathe again." I smiled. "That means everything." She started to walk away, then turned back. "You didn't just shake the system. You showed us we're allowed to stand up." That night, I sat alone in my office. I looked at the photo on my desk. Me and Maya from years ago. Both of us in oil-stained clothes after a volunteer build. She was right. All along. Sometimes the house needs shaking. Sometimes systems break. But the people? The people rebuild. And if they're lucky, they learn to lead on their own terms. Not quietly, not gratefully, but powerfully. Because survival isn't the goal. Standing tall after the storm is. I never thought betrayal would come with fine wine and filet mignon. But there I was, sitting at the head of a long, polished oak table in my parents' home, the kind of table reserved for celebrations. My father had spared no expense. Crystal glasses, candles, silverware I hadn't seen since Christmas 3 years ago. Everyone was there. Mom. My younger sister, Claire, dressed like she was headed to a Vogue interview. Her fiancé, a finance bro who hadn't blinked all dinner. Our CFO, the head of marketing. Even a few close family friends who had invested in our company over the years. Dad stood at the end of the table, holding up a glass of red. "A toast," he said, voice smooth and commanding. I felt a small flicker of warmth in my chest. Maybe, just maybe, this was it. The moment he'd finally recognize what I had done, what I had built. Our family business faced ruin, he said, eyes scanning the room. We were months, weeks from closing our doors, but thanks to hard work, creativity, and a bit of luck, we're thriving again. I smiled, quietly. I remembered those months, the sleepless nights, the constant meetings with suppliers threatening to cut us off. The heavy silence of our pharmacy when customers stopped coming. The fear in our staff's eyes as hours were cut. But, Dad continued, there was someone who brought a new vision. Someone who carried us through. My heart raced. My fingers tightened around my glass. This was it. To Claire, he said, turning to my sister with pride. Our new CEO. Applause, smiles, glasses raised. Claire beamed, pretending to be humble, her hand on Dad's arm like she'd actually earned it. I blinked. Wait. I stared at him. Surely he misspoke. Maybe he was building up to something else? But no. He sat down like the matter was closed. Claire? I said, keeping my voice level. She wasn't even in the lab. She's never developed a single... Dad chuckled. Sweetheart, he said, waving a hand. You're good with formulas. You always have been. But leadership takes more than that. Claire has presence. She knows how to work a room. Mom smiled softly at me, like I was a child who'd dropped her ice cream cone. Claire raised her glass toward me, eyes gleaming. And of course, she said, we couldn't have done it without Emily's help in R&D. She's brilliant with details. Absolutely. Dad nodded. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. For your contribution, he said, placing it on the table beside my plate. I stared at it. $100. For creating the very drug that saved our company. For staying up nights in our basement lab, working with borrowed equipment and donated compounds. For formulating the antiviral treatment that skyrocketed our reputation and led to the $200 million valuation we had just secured from a pharmaceutical conglomerate. I didn't say anything. I just folded the bill, tucked it into my purse, and finished my glass of wine. Because I knew something none of them did. The formula they had scaled? It wasn't the final version. They had patented an early model, one I had written in desperation during the height of our financial crisis. The real version, the perfected one, still sat in my encrypted files, the one that improved efficacy by 23% with fewer side effects. The one I hadn't uploaded to the shared company system, they hadn't even noticed the difference, because no one ever looks at the girl in the lab coat. I smiled politely throughout the rest of dinner. I even clapped when Claire stood up and gave her little CEO acceptance speech, full of vague promises and buzzwords she barely understood. Synergy, global expansion, customer-first innovation. It was like watching a TED Talk written by ChatGPT and sponsored by champagne. When dessert was served, Dad clinked his glass again. This is a proud day for the Caldwell family, he said. We have a future again. I nodded softly. Yes, we did, but it wouldn't be the one they expected. That night, I drove home in silence. My hands gripped the wheel, knuckles pale. I passed the pharmacy, the lights still glowing, the new sign gleaming. Caldwell Remedies, a family tradition. I built that name back up from the ashes, and they handed it to someone who didn't know a compound from a calculator. The next morning, I showed up to work as usual. No fanfare, no drama, just my badge, my coffee, and the cold, white hallway that led to my lab. But something was different. Everyone was quiet. And then I saw the memo taped to the door of my office. Effective immediately, Emily Caldwell will transition into a support role under the R&D department, reporting directly to Claire Caldwell, CEO. I read it twice. Then I opened the door. My office had been cleared. My desk was gone. My nameplate removed. In its place was a small cubicle outside the lab, wedged between supply storage and the janitor's closet. I stood there for a moment, breathing, processing. And then I smiled, because they had no idea what was coming next. I didn't react. I didn't storm into Claire's office demanding answers. I didn't ask Dad why the promotion I'd earned was handed to someone who didn't even know how to run a clinical trial. I didn't even mention the $100 bill he'd tossed at me like I was some part-time intern. Instead, I took my new cubicle, the one with flickering lights and no heating, and decorated it with quiet purpose. A photo of the original formula notes. My own name, Emily Caldwell, lead researcher, scrawled on a sticky note and taped where my nameplate should have been. A coffee mug that read, "Be careful, this scientist bites." And then I got to work. Because if they thought a new title and a corner cubicle could erase my contribution, they were underestimating the one thing they never understood. I don't fight with words. I fight with results. For the first week, I stayed invisible. Claire strutted through the hallways like she was born to lead, rehearsing slogans for the upcoming investor press conference. "Innovation is in our blood," she'd say with a practiced smile, while I sat in silence a few feet away, documenting the daily stability tests from my latest version of the drug. The funny thing was, most people still came to me for real answers. "Emily, does this lab report look off? Hey, can you recheck the efficacy data?" I don't think Claire knows the new FDA submission deadline. "Do you?" I'd answer quietly, always polite, never pushing back, because I knew something none of them did. Leadership isn't about the title on your door. It's about what happens when everything starts falling apart, and everyone still looks to you. 2 weeks after Claire took over, the cracks began to show. First, a shipment of the current drug formulation was returned from one of our major hospital clients in New York. Side effects were reported. Something about inconsistencies in the active compound blend. Claire brushed it off during the morning briefing. "Probably just an error in transport," she said, adjusting her overpriced blazer. "We'll fix it. No need to panic." But I already knew it wasn't a shipping error. I had warned the team months ago that the early formula, the one Claire had rushed through FDA approval to impress Dad, was unstable at extreme temperatures. But no one had listened. Then came the Boston order, one of our oldest clients. Same issue. This time, they pulled the plug entirely. Claire called an emergency meeting with the board. I wasn't invited, of course. But I sat near enough to hear muffled voices through the glass walls. Frantic, defensive, uncertain. When she finally emerged, she was pale. And for the first time, I saw it. The panic behind her perfect posture. That same afternoon, our lead chemist resigned. "I can't work under someone who doesn't know how the compound she's selling actually functions," he told me before walking out. I didn't argue. I just nodded. Then I pulled up the original notes on my private drive. The real version of the drug. The one they didn't even know existed. The one I had improved after months of quiet trials, late-night lab sessions, and consultations with researchers around the world. I hadn't uploaded it to Caldwell's system. Not because I was holding a grudge, but because I knew what would happen if Claire got her hands on it. She would stamp her name on my work again. Sell it without understanding it. Destroy it. No, this time I'd do it right. That night, I called 2 people I trusted. Dr. Harris, my old professor and mentor, now a senior consultant for half the major biotech companies in the country. And Raj Patel, a regulatory strategist who once helped my uncle sell his diagnostics patent to a Fortune 100 firm. We met at a quiet bistro 2 towns over. They didn't ask why I wanted to meet. They both knew something was wrong the moment they saw my face. I laid it out. Calm, clear, detailed. I showed them the updated version of the drug, the lab results, the documented trials, the data sets they knew couldn't be faked. "This isn't just better," Raj said, eyes scanning the printouts. "This is revolutionary." Dr. Harris looked at me over his glasses. "Does your family know you have this?" I shook my head. "They think they already won," I said simply. And then I smiled, for the first time in weeks. Let them keep thinking that. We talked for hours, planning, refining, strategizing. I wouldn't go to war with Claire or my father. That's not my style. Instead, teams were overworked and confused. Our tech partners started pulling back. Client meetings turned tense. Everyone whispered the same question behind closed doors. Where is the person who actually knows what's going on? The answer, of course, was sitting at a cramped desk between the mop closet and the janitor's break room. Me. I kept my head down, logging hours no one noticed. I didn't correct Claire when she misquoted our clinical trial data in her company-wide email. I didn't speak up when she promised an impossible launch timeline to an investor. Because it wasn't my job to fix her mistakes anymore. It was my job to build something better. And quietly, I did. At night, I worked on a new project. I called it Project Aletheia, Greek for truth. It wasn't just a better version of the drug. It was a full redesign. Stronger absorption rates, increased temperature stability, better results across 3 separate control groups. I filed for the provisional patent under my own name and housed the development under a new LLC, Calyx Biosolutions. No one at Caldwell knew. I had used a personal laptop, paid for lab access through a friend at a nearby university. Every paper trail was clean, and then came the opportunity I'd been waiting for. One of our former distributors, an old friend named Evan who had left after Claire's promotion, called me out of the blue. "Emily," he said, "I've been watching what's happening at Caldwell. It's not good. There's talk of pulling funding entirely." I didn't respond immediately. "I know you," he added after a moment. "You're not the type to just sit there while the house burns down." I smiled. "You're right." Then I sent him a file. Just a teaser. Early data. No formulas, just enough to start a conversation. 24 hours later, I was sitting across from him at a quiet cafe, sliding a manila envelope across the table. Evan skimmed the executive summary of Aletheia, his brow rising with each page. "This is real?" I nodded. He let out a low whistle. "You're going to crush them." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking for validation. I was preparing to make my move. 3 days later, Evan introduced me to a group of angel investors, former biotech execs who had walked away from the industry and were now hunting for the next big thing. And unlike my father, they didn't care what my last name was. They cared about results. I had those. Within a week, I had my first offer, a $5 million seed investment. No family strings, no corporate overlords, just me, my formula, and full creative control. When the paperwork arrived, I signed it in my tiny cubicle, surrounded by half-used pipette boxes and stale vending machine coffee. The same day, Claire scheduled an all-hands meeting. "The company is facing challenges," she began, pacing the stage like she was giving a TED Talk. "But with focus, we'll bounce back." She didn't even notice I wasn't listening. I was looking at the logo on the wall behind her. Caldwell Pharmaceuticals. A name that once meant family, loyalty, legacy. Now, it meant arrogance, blindness, waste. As the applause ended, Claire smiled and said, "And don't worry, R&D is in great hands with my sister working behind the scenes." Everyone clapped. I didn't, because by then I had already booked a one-way ticket to Boston. That evening, I packed up my apartment. No goodbyes, no confrontation. I left behind the lab coat with the Caldwell name embroidered on it, hanging on a hook in the bathroom. The next morning, I was gone. By the time the team noticed I hadn't shown up, I was already sitting in a co-working space on the other side of the country. finalizing the next version of the formula with my new team. Real scientists, real analysts, real leadership. People who saw me, people who trusted me. And when we launched our preclinical trials 6 weeks later, the early buzz started rolling in. The most promising innovation in antiviral therapy in a decade. Calyx Biosolutions is quietly disrupting the pharmaceutical industry. And my favorite, sources say the founder is a former employee of Caldwell Pharmaceuticals. Rumors of internal mismanagement continue. I didn't gloat. I didn't post cryptic quotes or LinkedIn jabs. I just kept building. Because while they were still trying to fix the old foundation, I was already living in the future. 2 months. That's how long it took before Caldwell Pharmaceuticals started publicly cracking. It began with whispers. Clients who didn't renew contracts, suppliers who demanded payments up front instead of billing later. Claire tried to mask it, of course. She tightened the PR spin, arranged glossy interviews, and posted motivational quotes on LinkedIn about resilience during uncertain times. But resilience doesn't fix science. And science was where I had always lived. Without someone maintaining the formula, the manufacturing pipeline began slipping. A bad batch went out to a major hospital in Chicago, resulting in side effects severe enough to make headlines. Claire issued a statement denying liability. But internally, she panicked. I heard about it all from Nora, my former assistant, who still worked there and texted me updates in code. Every message started with emojis. A fire, a microscope, a red flag, then a sentence. Claire just fired Paul. He questioned her timeline again. They rehired the compliance guy you warned them about. FDA audit incoming. Investor pullout confirmed. Everyone is nervous. You were right. Meanwhile, Calyx Biosolutions was gaining traction. We had secured a development grant from a government health agency. A respected biotech news outlet featured us in their top 10 startups to watch. Our preclinical trials were showing better efficacy than any similar treatment on the market. And still, I stayed silent. Not once did I comment on the downfall of my family's company. Not when a viral Reddit thread titled, "My boss Claire is a pharmaceutical disaster," started trending in industry circles. Not when Dad went on television to reassure investors and ended up walking off mid-interview when the host brought up Calyx Bio. Not even when I received an anonymous package with a single sticky note inside. "We need you. Please come back. M." I knew it was from Mom. Still, I didn't respond. Because going back would have meant stepping into the same cage they built for me. The cage labeled good with formulas. Instead, I kept building the empire they never believed I could. Then, on a gray Tuesday afternoon in October, the real blow hit. A pharmaceutical giant we had quietly partnered with, Hollander and Bloom, announced an exclusive license deal for our Alethea formula. The press release was short, clean, and devastating. H&B to distribute revolutionary antiviral drug developed by Calyx Biosolutions. Estimated $120 million deal. Projected to replace older generation treatments within 12 months, Caldwell's stock dropped 32% before lunch. I watched it happen from my glass-walled office, sipping tea, surrounded by a team that actually saw me for who I was. At 4:16 p.m., my phone buzzed. A number I hadn't seen in over a year. Dad. I didn't answer. Then another. Claire, followed by a short email. Emily, please, we need to talk. Claire. I stared at it for a moment. Not because I was unsure, but because I realized something. They still didn't get it. They thought they needed my mind, my work, my hands on the keyboard, fixing the mess. But what they really needed? Integrity, vision, leadership. Things you can't fake with designer suits or boardroom titles. I closed the email and forwarded it to my legal team, just in case. The next day, Claire showed up at the Calyx Biosolutions office. Unannounced. My assistant buzzed me. There's a woman here. Says she's your sister. I didn't react. Tell her I'm unavailable. There was a long pause. She's crying. I looked at the city skyline outside my window, lights flickering on as dusk approached. I thought of that dinner a year ago. The $100 bill, Dad's smug toast, Claire's smile. And I said calmly, "Send her away." My assistant hesitated, then replied, "Yes, ma'am." The next time I saw Claire, she was on the cover of Business Insight Weekly, under the headline, "From Legacy to Liability, How Caldwell Pharma Lost the Cure." I didn't buy the magazine. I didn't need to, because I was already writing my own story, and the ending would be mine to choose. I never planned to destroy them. That's what people don't understand. It was never about revenge. All I ever wanted was to be part of what I helped save, to be seen, valued. But when you're treated like you're replaceable for long enough, you stop trying to be included. You build something of your own. By November, Calyx Biosolutions was no longer a whisper in biotech circles. It was the conversation. Our drug, Alethea, had completed phase 1 trials with record-breaking results. The licensing deal with Hollander and Bloom had finalized. Our valuation had skyrocketed. I was in back-to-back meetings with partners from Europe, Asia, and the US, wanting in on the next round. Meanwhile, Caldwell Pharmaceuticals was bleeding. It started with their stock price. It dropped 32% the day our licensing deal went public. Within days, 3 of their biggest clients pulled out. Then came the layoffs. Quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. Half the R&D team was let go. 2 senior executives resigned. And then the FDA announced an investigation into discrepancies in their manufacturing reports. Apparently, Claire had tried to commission a new version of the drug, hoping to compete with Alethea. But she didn't have the formula. Only I did. I hadn't uploaded the final build into Caldwell's system. What they thought was the core of the cure was only a prototype. The real one was developed independently, in my own name, under my own company. They were trying to reverse engineer something they didn't even understand. I didn't make any public comments. I didn't grant interviews. I didn't throw shade on social media or leak anything to the press. I didn't need to. Calyx was soaring on its own. That week, a biotech magazine ran a story. Calyx Biosolutions, the quiet storm changing pharma forever. Beneath it was a picture of me, smiling, confident, exactly who they said I'd never be. I forwarded the article to no one. But I knew someone had read it, because that same night I received a letter. A real one. No email. No signature. Just a single sentence written on thick paper. We were wrong. No name. But I didn't need one. I knew it was from Dad. Still, I didn't respond. Because it wasn't just about being wrong. It was about everything they had thrown away in the process of being right. 1 week later, Claire showed up at the Calyx offices unannounced. She hadn't called. She hadn't emailed. She just walked in like it was still her world, and I was some misplaced lab technician. My assistant buzzed in. "There's a Claire Caldwell here. She says she needs 5 minutes." I paused, then calmly replied, "Tell her I'm in a meeting." A long silence. "She says it's urgent. She's crying." I looked out the window. Rain drizzled down the glass. Boston was quiet that morning, still waking up. I thought of the $100 bill, the smile she wore when Dad toasted her, the way they both acted like I was the intern who stumbled onto a lucky formula. "No meetings," I repeated. "Not today. Not for her." Claire didn't leave right away. She waited in the lobby for almost an hour. Then she disappeared. 2 days later, my legal team received an inquiry. Caldwell Pharmaceuticals wanted to sell. They were desperate, out of cash, out of time. They couldn't keep the lights on, and no one wanted to buy a half-broken company with an outdated formula and an open FDA investigation. They offered it to me. Not directly, of course. Through intermediaries, with conditions. They wanted the brand name to remain intact. I sent a counteroffer through my lawyer. Full acquisition, all assets, all patents, all rights, on one condition: the Caldwell name would be erased, absorbed into Calyx Bio. Gone. 2 days of silence. Then the papers came through. Signed. No comment. No negotiation. They knew they didn't have leverage anymore. The building was mine now. I flew out the next morning, walked through the front doors of the place I used to call home. The same marble floors, the same portraits of our legacy hanging in the main hallway. But the soul of the company was gone. Everyone who mattered had already left. At the top floor, I walked into what had once been Dad's office. The desk was bare. The room was hollow. And then, from my purse, I pulled out the only thing I brought with me. That $100 bill, still perfectly folded. I placed it on the windowsill where the light hit hardest. Not as revenge, not as a message, but as a symbol of everything they thought I was worth. And the empire I built anyway. 3 months after I bought what remained of Caldwell Pharmaceuticals, the name was gone. The new signs went up quietly. No press release, no flashy rebrand video. Just simple, matte black lettering on the glass entrance. Calyx Biosolutions. Innovation with integrity. The only people who noticed were the ones who needed to. The transition was smooth. We kept what was useful. The labs, the equipment, a few of the scientists who had stuck it out despite the chaos. But everything else? Gone. The old board. The outdated systems. The hierarchy built on ego, legacy, and assumption. Gone. Calyx was different. Transparent, merit-based, quietly unstoppable. And then, one morning, my assistant knocked on my office door with a face that told me something unexpected had arrived. "They're here," she said. No explanation necessary. I nodded. "Send them in." When the doors opened, my father and Claire walked in like shadows. Not the loud, commanding figures they used to be. No air of superiority, no swagger in their steps. They looked smaller somehow. Dimmed. Dad's eyes scanned the office slowly. The minimalist furniture, the innovation awards lining the far wall, the subtle Calyx logo etched into the glass. This wasn't his world anymore. Claire stayed silent. Her gaze flicked briefly to the corner of my desk where I'd placed a framed certificate. Emily Caldwell, founder, lead scientist, CEO. It hung above where her photo used to sit in Caldwell's office. She said nothing. "Emily," Dad began, voice strained, like he'd rehearsed it too many times. "We came to talk." I let the silence stretch. He cleared his throat. "We've lost everything. The house, the savings, the name. I'm not asking for pity. I'm asking for understanding." I watched him for a long moment. The man who once handed me a $100 bill across a gleaming dining table like it was a reward for sweeping the floor. "I see," I said finally, my voice calm. "And what is it you're hoping I'll do?" Claire stepped forward. "We want a chance to be part of this again." I raised an eyebrow. "This? You mean the company you told me I wasn't qualified to lead?" Her voice cracked. "We made mistakes." I nodded. "Yes, you did." Dad took a slow breath. "Emily, we were wrong about everything." It wasn't defiant. It wasn't prideful. It was hollow. Honest. But honesty after ruin is still just ruin. I stood, walking slowly to the window behind my desk. The city stretched out before me, alive, humming, full of the future. I remembered how it felt to walk away from that dinner table a year ago. How heavy it was. How final. And how freeing. When I turned back to them, I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was simply done. "You didn't just misjudge me," I said quietly. "You erased me. You handed the company to someone who never spent a night in the lab. You called me a background player in my own story." Dad looked down. Claire blinked hard, trying not to cry. "I'm not going to punish you," I said. "That's not who I am. I've already moved on." Claire swallowed. "Then what happens now?" I gave her a long, calm look. "Now? You leave this building, and you don't come back." Dad nodded slowly, like he had expected it. but Claire took a step forward. You don't hate us? I let out the faintest laugh. Number, I don't hate you. I pity you. They stared at me. Because I built something real, I continued. Something you tried to take credit for. Something you tried to control. And still, I rose. I built a company without shortcuts, without your approval, without needing your name behind me. Claire's face crumbled, but I held her gaze. You didn't believe in me. That was your choice. Living with the consequences is mine. They left without another word. And when the door closed behind them, I sat back in my chair. A full year had passed since the dinner where they handed my future to someone else. Since the night Dad gave me a crumpled bill and called it gratitude. Since I walked out. Quiet, broken, determined. And now? I was whole. Calyx Biosolutions had just crossed $320 million in market value. We were entering phase 3 trials on a second-generation treatment already being called a miracle drug in early reports. My team was thriving. My name was no longer buried in the back pages of science journals. It was on covers, in boardrooms, etched into the foundation of something I had built from scratch. All without them. That evening, I sat on the rooftop of the headquarters alone, watching the sun dip behind the skyline. I pulled the $100 bill from my coat pocket, folded neatly, just as I'd kept it all this time. Then, without ceremony, I tore it down the center. The paper fluttered in the wind, two halves drifting away into the dusk. Not because I needed to let go, because I already had. This wasn't a revenge story. It was a story about becoming. About remembering that you don't need someone else's belief to build something unstoppable. They thought I was just good with formulas. Turns out I was good with empires too. And I wasn't done building.